Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's Manchester JMCE Centre of Excellence seminar. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Henri Vogt from the University of Turku. Professor Vogt has been a professor of international politics at the University of Turku since 2010, and he has studied at the universities of Helsinki and Oxford, and received his doctorate at the latter in 2001. And his areas of research expertise look at things like democracy, democratic participation, the European Union, foreign policy, globalization. But today we are going to specifically look at European politics, and in particular the German elections. So what I'd like to do is again pass over to Professor Vogt. If you have any questions or queries, again, you can see on the bottom of the Zoom link, the Q&A function. Please use that for any questions that you may have or any points that you would like to raise. And after the presentation, which will last roughly about 35 minutes, I will present them to Professor Vogt. So I will hand over now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Welcome on my behalf as well. It's a pleasure to be on Zoom. What can you do? I would have liked to come to Manchester. I've been there once in the conference. That was in Salford. Is that Manchester? Yes. It would be nice to know who you are. It's kind of weird, of course, to talk to an audience that is completely unknown to the speaker, but that is how it is. And I'll try to find a middle way. Maybe some of the things that I talk are just far too trivial for you. Maybe some of the things are, well, maybe too complicated. Let's see. I think I'll try to share my screen now. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay. Then wait a sec. Like this. Yeah. I have a few starting points here. I'm a Nordic scholar, as you know, although I did my doctorate once upon a time in the UK, as you heard. But so I look at Germany as an outsider. But I've been living there 3 times, in fact, and most recently for 3 years now in 2016, 2019. But anyway, my comparisons they are generally with the Nordic countries. If I compared with the UK, maybe my conclusions were slightly different. I'm originally an analyst of Eastern European democratization. That was the theme of my doctoral dissertation. The thesis have been published under the name of Between Utopia and Disillusionment, 2005. But in that book or in that project, then Eastern Germany was one of the case study countries. So in that respect, I have been following the German developments over the past at least 25 years, if not 30 years. And my wife is German, by the way. I will begin with a few points related to the German domestic situation prior to the elections for quite some time. Then I will say a few words about the September elections, and try to interpret them from the point of view of Europe, the European Union, and even from the point of view of their global consequences. I'll say quite a lot, but we can then go into details in the Q&A session. But my main argument is perhaps something like this. We will see a great deal of stability and continuity in German politics over the next few years. but we will also see some sort of sharpenings of emphasis or tones in distinct areas of European and external policies. Yeah, I can't see any chat at the moment, so I don't know anything about the audience here.
Don't worry, I'll collate at the end, Henry, and then if there's anything that comes through, I can fit in.
I was wondering whether we have any Germans in the,
I think we do.
in the audience. Well, you can challenge me, and you can tell me later on that it's just crap. But then you can give me comments on by email. So any comments are welcome. Anyway, a year ago, approximately, or 13 months ago, as unified Germany had its 30th birthday, I wrote a little newspaper article in Finnish on the current German societal and political condition, based on a fairly superficial reading of the country, but I had just been living there for 3 years anyway. And the main concept that I then had in mind was the notion of cleavage, a central political science concept, obviously. So in that little piece, I started off by describing the cleavages that I could identify in the country. And I thought, in general, my take on Germany is that the hierarchies are there considerably more pronounced, deeper than in the Nordic countries in general. I wonder whether they are, after all, less deep than in the UK, but that's another issue, of course. But anyway, I listed 5 general cleavages in German society. The first one was the most obvious one in a sense, and the one that has been discussed quite a bit over the past decades, the distinction between East German Länder and West German Länder. To my mind, this distinction, however, has been waning. It's much less prevalent than it was 20 years ago. But one can, of course, still see some sort of differences in terms of income levels, in terms of nativism, i.e. the idea of, or the importance of having a more or less homogeneous society. Nativist ideas tend to be more common in the East than they are in the West, and that then explains, at least to an extent, why the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, is more popular in the eastern part of the country than in the West. But overall, it's waning. The more important cleavage, to my mind, is that between winners and losers. A very general distinction, of course, across any industrialist countries in the age of neoliberalism. But it takes place in terms of incomes, educational levels, even the media sources that people generally consult when they wish to know something about the world. So one can, to my mind, surprisingly much find poverty and even a sense of decline in German cities, perhaps more than one could expect, given the great successes of the German economy over the 15, 20 past years. This export world records, what they have been setting. I was a bit surprised in that respect when I lived there the last time. So I have had this feeling that the entire German society is so concentrated on production, industrial production, that not everyone actually can cope with that. Differences, society institutions do not try to downplay these differences to a sufficient extent, to my mind. Differences, for example, between schools are fairly distinct. That may also be because the educational systems are lender-based, so there is no unifying educational policy in that, or to a limited extent. The third cleavage was the digital cleavage, which I found somehow quite fascinating. There are very conservative views in Germany, trying to avoid any kind of usage of digital means, and at the same time, the country's industry produces the highest high tech in the world. But somehow I have a feeling that sort of this attitude against digitalization that does cause problems in society. I'm myself against digitalization in many respects, but an individual does not make that much of a difference. Then the distinction between men and women of the cleavage is deeper than it should and could be, in my view. I've come across several articles in which female parliamentarians complain that when they talk in the parliament, the men turn away. I was on parental leave in Germany last time, and 2 years off from my professorship here in Finland, and I was well, that did cause some sort of reactions in the audience. How can you do something like that? And finally, there is some sort of an environmental paradox in the country. Germany has, of course, always been listed as one of the great countries of environmental consciousness, but at the same time, you have cars everywhere, and cars are really a holy cow, and of course, the industrial production in total, it requires huge amounts of energy that is not produced, not always produced environmentally friendly. Of course, that has improved. So these five, and it's obvious then that during this pandemic, these sort of conflict lines, cleavages in society, tensions, they have been visible in many contexts in the country. But so the tensions have been to an extent fairly intensive. But there's another side to that coin, and I will come back to that later on. Okay, then in this context, in the context of cleavages, we had a parliamentary election in September. The year of Angela Merkel came to an end, and it was an epochal change, as we have hopefully all realized. And the dominant party basically from the Second World War onwards, the CDU, they did not even reach the 25% hurdle in the elections. They got less votes than any time since World War II. But in spite of this major change, this was, to my mind, paradoxically a fairly conservative change. In spite of this volatility, the mainstream simply won. The political center won, and the Greens in Germany, they nowadays they are truly mainstream in my view, and the realos within the party, so they call the shots there, and this radical phalanx is much weaker than it used to be in my view. So in that respect, the primary, the most important slogan of Olaf Scholz, the next chancellor, respect, he said. It actually proved well chosen, with a view precisely of these to this cleavage. Of course, in my view, it was also by far the most important, the most convincing candidate in election debates. There was no question about it, and the the audiences also thought so. But anyway, there seems to be a strengthening understanding that downplaying these various cross-cutting cleavages is indeed crucially important for societal coherence, for the future of democracy, for maintaining the innovative basis of society as well. The pandemic, of course, played a role here. People did appreciate the old, but they also possibly thought that the way it had been handled in Germany, the pandemic, it was not all that bad. We have seen demonstrations, but overall it has also proved how strong the country's democracy after all is, and therefore challenging it too much was not an option in the election. So one could see a clear strive for stability in politics, something that Germany has, of course, followed basically the entire World War II era. The country has become a multi-party system, and now it's truly a multi-party system, very much in the same way as the Scandinavian countries or the Netherlands. But in comparison with some other major countries in Europe, the element of continuity is there in spite of this. In France, Italy, Spain, the party systems have collapsed over the past 20 years, and that anything like that, nothing like that has happened in Germany. So these kinds of fairly general interpretations lead to a question that has kind of informed the preparation of this little talk. How does the public strive for stability and continuity translate into stability in German politics towards the EU, and even into overall European stability and predictability? In a Europe that is fluctuating, that is in turmoil in many respects still. If you take a look at France, this new chap there, Henri Vogt, a journalist, is immensely popular in the country. And in comparison to him, Marine Le Pen is a left-wing liberal. So that kind of, in that context of some sort of turmoil in many parts of Europe, so it's important to think of German stability. Well, this part of the world is pretty stable as well here in Finland. So the next slide is then about these possible consequences in the EU, in the European context, of the policies that this new government coalition that will be composed of the SPD, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats. Liberal Democrats could be a translation as well. And we will have this ample coalition, red, green, and yellow, traffic light coalition. First of all, this coalition will be very strongly pro-European. There is no doubt about it. Pro-European Union. Maybe even more so than the current government. But that's, of course, still only speculation. So it's hard to see any major changes in Germany's attitudes towards Europe, but one can wonder whether there will be somehow less pragmatism involved in German policy making. Angela Merkel was and is immensely clever in finding lowest common denominators within European policies, and could therefore solve crises and find feasible policy solutions. For example, in immigration policy. And it remains to be seen whether there's anything like that then in the new German government. Of course, Scholz gives an impression of moderation for sure. But what we will possibly see that if this decline of pragmatism is indeed the case, that we will possibly see some sort of strengthening of the human rights and liberal identity political agenda in German policymaking. And this then can, in my view, it can cause some sort of counter reactions across the continent. And this then, this in turn then may in fact enhance some sort of polarizations within the European polity. There is some research evidence that the right wing in Hungary and Poland, above all, they do see Germany as a hegemon, and that hegemon is not a benevolent one. There's another possible logic of polarization in Europe. That's the north-south divide in Europe, and there are currently intensive talks about the next holder of the post of the Ministry of Finance. It will be either the Greens or the FDP. But if the FDP gets the finance ministry, it may be that because they are fairly strongly in favor of the austerity policies that Germany has had over the or emphasized over the past 15 years, they have this now this Schuldengrenze, this credit limits that's a constitutional credit limit they cannot bypass in Germany. Because if austerity policies remain strong, that may cause counter reactions in the south, in countries that still face economic problems because of the crisis 10 years ago, but the crisis is there still to an extent. The competitiveness is not quite as good as it could be. But then, of course, issues like the Green Deal of the European Commission at the moment, digital investments, they are high on the agenda of all these three parties, and they are high on the EU Commission's agenda. So with those policies, we can possibly see even more research feedback from the German side for them. Yeah, so overall, the new government will most likely not lessen polarizing tendencies in European politics, but it will strongly support the current policies of the European Commission. These, again, are fairly general remarks, but I'm a conceptually oriented political scientist, and I'm always interested in the underlying ideas of policy, of politics, concepts that inform politics. So I've been now interested in the underlying ideas that seem to inform the political wishes and objectives of this incoming coalition. And it seems to me that these objectives can be compressed under three key terms: responsibility, autonomy, and connectivity. And if you want to take something from this talk back home, so take these three terms. In German political discourse, in policy documents that I've been reading, they are not always explicitly expressed or referred to, but they are often also just underlying ideas, but often also very explicit. At least the two first are also very explicit. The connectivity, perhaps less so. They are also very much à la mode in policy parlance at the moment across Europe. But in that sense, they are also European policy objectives or underlying ideas. In that respect, I've been wondering also, so since these three seem to be so important in the agendas of these three parties and in the public debate around the objectives, so that may actually mean that Germany really truly leads Europe in ideological terms. So the first of these three, responsibility, which there is obviously a great amount of literature on responsibility in international affairs and about whether countries or institutions actually can have responsibilities, or whether responsibilities are only a term that should be reserved for individuals. But be that as it may, it's very clear that the entire coalition, all these three parties, strongly seem to speak in favor of increased German responsibility in the world and in Europe as well. So, the immense economic power of the country should finally be turned into political power and influence. So there's hardly any idea of being what Will Patterson called a reluctant hegemon 10 years ago. Not at all. If this country will be sworn in, if this government will be sworn in, they definitely will not be a reluctant government. Although, of course, we can already say that in the case of the Ukraine crisis 2014, Merkel already then and Germany played a major role in trying to solve that problem in the Kiev talks, etc. So in that respect, maybe this is nothing new. In the policy documentation, however, it's difficult to say what this emphasis on responsibility actually mean. It may certainly mean more investments in security and development policies. So Germany bears its responsibility in the world, more investment in NATO cooperation, more international European coordination on foreign policy and development agendas, and with German as an initiative-rich and proactive partner, and possibly even in the European context in a dominant position. Yes, that's somehow interesting as an argument. Also, it has been said that Merkel was, in spite of being brilliant in crisis situations, that she was not really able to provide European or global politics with any special initiatives that could make a difference in the long run. Whereas Macron in France, he is full of more or less good initiatives. So it will be interesting to see whether Germany will will be able to provide justified policy agendas for the future in a more systematic manner than so far. The second term that interests me is strategic autonomy, an issue that is very much on the agenda in European policy circles, in think tanks, etc. I have myself been involved in a small research project on European strategic autonomy in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. So Europe should be strategically self-sustaining. It should conduct its own foreign and defense policies and not care too much about the doings of the US. Europe can survive without the US. This attitude can of course then concern many sectors of society. We can talk of technological autonomy, healthcare autonomy. That has been obviously very important during the pandemic, as have been some sort of supply chain autonomies. Here, I also see an interesting possibility for strengthening the Franco-German axis, because Macron has been the prime promoter of the idea of Europe's strategic autonomy. If some of you have read his speech in the Sorbonne, was it 2019? In that speech, he very strongly propagated Europe's strategic autonomy. Of course, then the contrast was slightly different than it is at the moment, because he, of course, wanted to counteract the US policies of the time, Trump's policy. If that is the case, that France and Germany find each other in a new way again, so then, of course, questions about leadership within Europe materialize in a new way. Who will lead and how? France and Germany together, with which resources, on the basis of what kinds of ideas? Closely related to this are also the relations with China and Russia, Europe relations and Germany's own relations. The Greens, as you may know, have been very critical about Russia and very critical about China as well. So they certainly want to limit the impact of these two. So it remains to be seen whether we'll see some sort of stronger restrictions vis-a-vis these two major powers, whether they will be employed. There's also in the slide, I mentioned also the Nord Stream project, the gas pipeline from Russia to Germany. It will be interesting to see what happens with it too. The SPD has supported it strongly, whereas the Greens would stop the whole project. I believe the FDP would be more market-oriented, closer to the SPD view here. So maybe they will not stop it. Finally, there is the idea of connectivity, which is surely much less known for you somewhere in the audience. But the idea of connectivity has actually been very important in the EU's political agenda over the past, say, 5 years. And at the moment, the Commission is actually drafting a major connectivity strategy for the entire European Union. So to an extent, I'm inclined to see reflections of this overall agenda in the current German views as well. I included here two definitions of connectivity as well. I will not read both of them, but Parakanas, he's a geographer. He's connectography. It's a brilliant little book on the connections in the world. But his definition is so beautiful here somehow. Like liberty or capitalism, connectivity is a world historical idea, one that gestates, spreads, and transforms over a long time scale and brings about epochal change. Every day, for the first time in their lives, millions of people switch on mobile phones, log on to the web, move into cities, or fly on an airplane. We go where opportunity and technology allow. Connectivity is more than a tool, it's an impulse, Anyway, connectivity that is somehow located between the internal and the external. It's an idea that says that the country should be somehow better connected in and with the world. There's a linkage here to the idea of responsibility as well. So there's a great deal of emphasis on digitalization, on infrastructures, material and information flows, of course in Germany, but also in the European context and beyond. There is possibly also a pragmatic idea that relations of cooperation need to be solved case by case. And we need to preserve those connections that are valuable and get rid of those that are less important. So in spite of the critique against China and Russia, cooperation with them will remain possible in various policy sectors. So this actually means also that there is an idea of global pluralism, because functional connections dominate the world's political arenas, and not any overly ideological frameworks of thinking. There's also a clear internal dimension here. Germany, as most Western countries, now need labor force, qualified labor force. Therefore, I talk of qualified opening. So Germany, people in these parties that somehow dream that Germany would somehow become a true hub of all kinds of connections. People who move in, they feel themselves connected. But perhaps this is just a matter of modernization that has been important for Olaf Scholz agenda as well. Coming to the end of my talk. So given these general foreign external policy agendas, ideas, aims, objectives. So one can, of course, then ask what will happen to these cleavages that I started off with. Maybe, after all, the fact that we are about to get a new coalition, a new kind of coalition for German politics. So even this may already reach some cleavages in the country. And it shows that some sort of democratic pragmatism prevails. It shows how strong German democracy, after all, is. Of course, there is the risk that now, since the three parties, they have their distinct agendas, the differences are distinct. And because of this, then maybe they don't find any compromises, and then things just remain how they are. However, there are these sort of results of the first government talks already available. Sondierungsergebnisse, they were like a 12-page document, and there are a number of issues social issues that are included there. So one can clearly see the touch of the SPD and the Greens there. So maybe we can see some sort of more consistent efforts to bridge the cleavages, and especially the social cleavage in society. The jargon that they use in this brand new document, it's less than 2 weeks old. Somehow I actually added the German quotation there, but the idea is that these countries claim that what joins us is that we see chances in changes. That sounds quite good in English, by the way. Different party traditions and outlooks can create an innovative coalition, and in fact then weaken the existing conflict lines. They are aware of the conflict and optimistic that they can downplay them in the future. Anyway, perhaps this is what politics is all about: coping with differences. And even though my beginning may have been somewhat gloomy, so the final verdict is pretty positive. So Germany may actually be quite good at coping with these differences, coping with cleavages in society at the moment. Thank you. This is our dinner table from 2 days ago, and it's not a political statement.
Thank you so much, Henry. I really enjoyed that, and I completely appreciate that your table is not being a political statement. I'm going to hand over to Dimitris just to kind of act as discussant, and I have a couple of questions that have come in that I'm going to pose to you.
I'll probably stop sharing now.
Yes, yeah, if you'd like. So Dimitris, I'm just going to hand over to you while I collate the questions.
Well, thanks very much, Catherine. And apologies for coming into the seminar a little bit late. I'm connecting from Athens, Greece, and traffic is not always easy to defeat here. But I'm delighted to join. And I very much enjoy Henry's talk. I thought it was excellent. Let me perhaps start with two very brief comments, because we don't have a lot of time ahead of us. The first is this perhaps paradox, and I think you hinted at it, Henry, at the beginning of your presentation, that perhaps the CDU's defeat in the poll has something to do with underinvestment domestically and issues with wage depression and so on. That to me is very, very interesting, because it seems to me that this austerity paradigm that Germany has been very successful in exporting to the rest of Europe and defending against its critics in Europe is somehow meeting strong opposition back home. That somehow the great success that many Europeans see in German policy in maintaining this austerity posture and policy and succeeding in it, perhaps the Germans themselves now seem to be less sure about, and whether you think that this is something worth commenting. The second point, I thought that you made a very good point about Chancellor Merkel being good at managing crises and being a consensus builder. I would certainly agree with the latter, in the sense that in all the big three crises that you mentioned, the Eurozone crisis, Ukraine, refugee, she did manage to find a common denominator, which was not at all easy, but I'm not sure she has found a solution. And that's, I find quite interesting, which then links to your idea about European or German leadership in Europe. What can German activism look like on the European stage, and will it be a game changer? I don't share a lot of optimism here. I think that the examples that you've used, you know, the Green Deal and so on, yes, they are all important initiatives, but are they really game changers for a decline in support for for the European project, declining perhaps global leadership for Europe? I'm not entirely sure that this is true. And again, I'm throwing back the question to you. What can Germany do to be that can be a game changer for Europe? You know, something, I don't know, like the relaunch of Europe in the 80s, the Maastricht in the 90s, enlargement in the 2000s. Is there a big idea? And can this big idea come from Germany, or shall we look from somewhere else?
The connection was slightly, a little problematic here towards the end of the question, but I think I got your point. Underinvestment is a very good word. I should have used it myself. Thanks for that. I had the feeling that in Germany that indeed they should and could have invested more in their own infrastructures. Of course, to an extent, the lender structure makes some investments also difficult, and some lenders are richer than some others, and in some places although infrastructures are better, and in some they are they are worse. I sincerely believe that they have now understood that they should invest more in schools, in hospitals, simply in that kinds of things. But of course, now it remains to be, and that is something that we do not yet know to what extent. Well, because FDP may be more critical about investing too much. What kind of a compromise will be reached in this respect? And of course, then that relates to the European austerity, it relates to the Green Deal, it relates to digital initiatives and infrastructures, etc. In terms of digital investments, of course, the attitudes, that's an interesting issue. I can't, even though the infrastructures may be good, but if you don't want to use digital means, then you're in trouble. Yeah, so that relates to Merkel's solutions. I guess you are right, and in many respects, the interim solutions, or whatever term one wants to use, they were harsh. They were in Greece at the moment. I suppose in Greece they were regarded as very harsh in many cases. But again, it's even though the Greens and the Liberals may be keen on playing this stronger agenda and bringing about new types of ideas, Scholz is more careful, I'm afraid. So I'm a bit skeptical about that. On the other hand, related to your last point, then, so I'm a bit critical about this discourse of Europe being in a major crisis at the moment. And if one takes a longer view of Eurobarometers, so of course it goes like this, but overall, people's general support for the European project is surprisingly stable over the past 3 decades. I haven't been looking at the older figures. And then there are also there are also those who argue that the constitutional foundation of the union is so strong at the moment that actually sort of grand new projects that should be invented, that's not the case. The foundation is sufficiently strong. We don't need these grand projects anymore. And one could also argue that the way the union handled the Brexit actually supports my argument here. So in that respect, I'm not sure whether Germany will come about with any major projects, but if that's necessary, that's another issue.
That's great. Thank you very much. I put my hand up because I'm going to bring in some of the questions we've had. And the first one, I'll give you three, Henry, that have come in. The first is from Matthew Jeffries, Dr. Matthew Jeffries, and he says that your title includes the word volatility. Is it unusual to see Germany described as volatile? And in fact, the content of your talk suggests kind of continuity and nuance changed rather than volatility. So he would like to know why you chose this adjective of volatility. And the second one comes from a student, Zachary Klein, and he would like to know that many expect Berlin to defend the liberal international order. Do you believe that because Germany is indeed a reluctant hegemon, Europe is now confronted with a new German problem, whereby, say, expectations are not adequately taking into considering perhaps the domestic priorities against the backdrop of, say, global competition and instability? I'll leave you with those two.
Can you repeat the latter one? I'm not sure whether I got the point.
Yes. So the latter one is, I'll shorten it down a little bit, but many expect Germany to help defend the liberal international order. Do you believe that because Germany is a reluctant hegemon, Europe is confronted with a new German problem?
It's no longer a reluctant hegemon. That was my point, basically. But it will be an even stronger supporter of liberal internationalism in whatever way we wish to understand. But whether that then can be a problem, it's too early to say. But I have great difficulties in seeing it causing problem. I think there is now quite a bit of evidence already of the consequences of these austerity policies, by way of example. So I'm actually inclined to argue that resorting to that those kinds of policy agendas will be more difficult in the future than it has been so far. I hope there is more sensitivity towards the others. Volatility. Well, I'm not sure whether I wasn't entirely happy with my title anyway, but I chose the word. Well, Dimitris asked me to send something, and I chose the word because it's so obviously it's volatility on the surface, in a sense, but overall, even though it looks a lot, the changes they are smaller than they look like.
The follow-up question I have is from Professor Simon Bulmer. And he asks, isn't the environmental cleavage you mentioned at the start key as part of your presentation, because with climate change's importance and Germany's continued use of coal and CO2 emissions make it difficult to play a leading role in the debate internationally, and in particular in the EU, especially as there are likely tensions between the Greens and FDP in a future coalition?
Maybe, but Germany has, after all, had the Energiewende, and although that actually then meant that the use of coal increased over a couple of years. So, but I still think that they have been investing in the renewables more than most other countries. Maybe Denmark and Sweden may beat them, but with the Greens in the government and the green agenda is pretty strong also in the SPD, and when one reads the FDP election program, it's also there. They are by no means strangers to a strong environmental agenda. I actually, when I took, I had not been reading the election manifestos before this talk, but now I did what I could find on the internet. But I was actually surprised of the number of similarities there. They were closer to each other than I expected, which actually was, in my view, not surprising, because in Scandinavia, especially here in Finland, the Greens and they are truly a liberal party, and they actually, in many respects, cover the agendas of the German Greens and the Liberal Democrats.
One very final question, because I am conscious of time, but I think this encompasses quite a few questions that we have got. And again, it's from Matthew Jeffries, and he asks that he would query your statement about downplaying cleavages and the fact it's crucially important for social cohesion. Matthew wants to know, surely cleavages need to be recognised and addressed, not downplayed.
Yeah, I agree. And they, of course, there will always be cleavages, and that's how societies are being built. But there is, of course, also always a limit at where they become harmful for societal coherence. And in some regions, as we have seen riots in Koblenz, that kind of things, and then when people take to the streets, then maybe that limit has been reached, and I guess social democrats have understood that in some corners of the country, so the people feel somehow inferior or whatever. But maybe it's speculation. But yes, you have a point. The cleavage is always there, but they should not become harmful.
Well, thank you so much for a thoroughly interesting presentation. It brought me back to things that I really haven't looked at for quite some time, particularly around winners and losers and cleavages. It was really, really great. And we have had such a fantastic audience today as well, from people from all over the UK, of Europe and beyond. And I think it just shows the strength of the centre, but also the strength of the subject and the speaker as well. So thank you very much, Professor Vogt, for taking the time to speak with us today. And hopefully we'll be in person in Manchester very, very soon, and we'll extend the invitation again. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. Please have a look on the Jean Monnet Centre website for all our upcoming seminars. Our next one will take place at the same time online via Zoom on the 17th of November. So hopefully you can join us then. We'll be joined by Dr. Mary C. Murphy from UCC, University College Cork, who'll be talking about Brexit, the UK and Ireland relations. Plenty, I'm sure, to discuss. But for now, have a lovely Wednesday and take care, and we'll see you all very soon.